Hello everybody, thank you very much for watching. I'm Roger. This is a continuation from an earlier video on root position part writing. This is going to focus on root motion by second. So if you haven't seen that earlier video, I recommend that you watch that first. So let's get to it. In the earlier video, we talked about common tones. When chordal roots are a second apart, there aren't going to be any common tones. That is going to force all our voices to move because we can't keep any common tones in the same voice, which we'll learn later can be very helpful when we study root motion by third and perhaps fourth as well. But when root motion moves by second, like we see here, between this 4 chord in the key of G major and the 5 chord that we're going to do the voice leading to, there aren't going to be any common tones. In this C chord, we're going to have the notes C, E, and G, and in this 5 chord, we're going to have D, F sharp, and A. Those are the notes of the triad, right? When we go from the 4 chord to the 5 chord, we don't have any notes in common between these 2 chords, so they're all going to have to move. And that's where we often get into trouble with parallel perfect octaves, parallel perfect fifths. But before we actually do the voice leading from 4 to 5, we need to talk about 4-voice part writing and the fact that we're just writing with triads right now. Inherent to a triad is that there are only 3 pitches. So if we're writing in 4 voices, it stands to reason that we're going to have to double one of those 3 pitches. The question is, which member of the triad should we double? And with root position triads, the note that is most often doubled is the chordal root, which is indicated here, root position triads, double chordal root. That's why this 4 chord right here, this C major triad, has 2 C's in it. It just happens to be in the bass and the tenor, and then the other 2 voices complete the triad with the E and G. It's also important to realize that I could have voiced this 4 chord a number of different ways. So I could have voiced it as C, G, C, E, or I could have done C and E in the tenor, and then a G in the alto, and then a C in the soprano. There are a number of ways I could have voiced this chord. I don't want you to think that the doubling of the chordal root has to be in the tenor just because I did it in this particular example. The doubled chordal root could appear in any of the other voices, okay? Just don't want to take anything for granted here. All right, so we've got this C chord. That's what you're given. The doubled chordal root, C is in the tenor. We have the E in the alto and G in the soprano. And we're going to go to this 5 chord, which is going to be a D chord, which is going to have a D in it. It's going to have an F sharp and an A in it, and we're going to double that D somewhere. And what often happens is students, they're just doing this for the first time, so it's understandable. They don't really have any choice with the D and the bass, right, because we're moving to a root position 5 chord, so we have no choice in that matter. But in the upper voices, we do have a choice, and often students will do this. They're looking at things very vertically, right, and they're very new to this. So they're looking at this C chord and they're trying to figure out what's in a C chord, and then they're like, okay, I need to move that to a D chord. What are the notes in the D chord? And they're like, okay, well, I need to have an F sharp and an A, and they're aware that conjunct motion is preferable, and so there's a lot that's positive about this, right? They're moving all the voices by step. They've got a complete triad here, right? We have a D, F sharp, and A. That's a complete triad. And I have a doubled chordal root. That's good too. But the problem is I have a few errors based on the style of music that we are studying, right? I have parallel perfect octaves between the bass and the tenor, and I have parallel perfect fifths between, well, I have them between the tenor and the soprano, as well as the bass and the soprano. These kind of errors are very common with this type of progression because there are no common tones between these 2 chords. When you have root motion by second with root position triads, we can avoid all that parallel mess by just moving the upper 3 voices in contrary motion to the bass. So since the bass is moving up, contrary to that would be down. So the upper 3 voices will move down to the closest available chord tone. So in the soprano, if we were to move that down to the closest available chord tone, we would go from G to F sharp. In the alto, going down, which is also contrary motion to the bass, right? The closest available chord tone would be D. So now I have 2 Ds. There's my doubled chordal root. I have my third, the chordal third, the F sharp and the soprano. And then the same thing, I'm going to do the same thing in the tenor. I'm going to move that down, contrary motion to the bass, to the closest available chord tone. And that will get me the A that that I was missing, right? Now I have a complete triad, I have that doubled chordal root, and I don't have any of those parallel perfect fifths or parallel perfect octaves that we saw a moment ago. We just have to remember that whenever we have chordal roots that move by second, such as in this example from 4 to 5, we need to move those upper three voices in contrary motion to the bass to the closest available chord tone. Now, just to add something to this a little bit, if this was in G minor, for example, so all I have to do here is really erase the key signature and write in the key signature for G minor. There's an added error potentially to that voicing I had a moment ago where all the voices were moving up by step, right? I still have those parallel perfect octaves between the bass and tenor and the parallel perfect fifths between the soprano and tenor and soprano and bass, but now I have an additional error, an augmented second in the alto voice. And I usually write +2 when my students do this. And this is unique to minor keys at first when we're in a diatonic world. This note here in the alto voice is part of this 4 chord. That's an E flat, right? In G major, it was an E natural, right? So we didn't have that augmented second when I voiced this in G major and had all those voices moving up by step. There was not an error in that alto voice. But now there is, because in G minor, the scale degree 6 is not the E natural, not as part of the 4 chord, which of course is going to be minor in G minor. Right? So now we have an E flat, and if we move up by step, that's going to give us a melodic second, which composers tended to avoid. But again, all we have to do is move those upper three voices in contrary motion to the bass, to the closest available chord tone, and we get rid of all those errors. All right? So just keep in mind, if you have root motion by second, move those upper three voices in contrary motion to the bass, and you will be fine. Thank you very much for watching. In the next video, I'll go over chordal root motion by third.